Well, that was Prime Minister Narendra Modi talking about rewarding the honest taxpayers. Slew of announcements and important statements made by him this morning. They're looking at faceless assessment, faceless appeal and taxpayers' charters on a platform. The government will continue to carry out structural reforms. This was assured by the Prime Minister today. Faceless assessment and taxpayer charter will be applicable from today itself. The taxpayer will get confidence of the department being fair and being honest and just. In fact, today marks a new journey to honor the honest, says the Prime Minister. Nation's honest taxpayers play a big role in the country's development and they ought to be rewarded. Faceless tax appeals will be beginning from 25th of September. New tax portal will help reduce government interference. It will have people-centric and public-friendly approach. He also said that there was an era where reforms were limited to talks or were taken under immense pressure. But right now, they're rewarding integrity, they're rewarding sensitivity in bureaucracy. Real reforms are holistic, are policy-based, and he said that India, despite all the COVID challenges, is getting record FDI flows. Complex tax system leads to low tax compliance, and they're looking to simplify the structure to reward the honest taxpayers and to increase compliance as well. They aim to have clear laws, less compliance burden for taxpayers. Reform, he says, is a holistic one, and it's going to be a continuous process for this government. They're trying to create seamless, faceless and painless system. 3 lakh tax disputes have been settled under Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, an important statement coming in from the Prime Minister. He said that faceless tax assessment will reduce unnecessary litigation. The taxpayer charter will enshrine rights and obligations of a citizen. The number of income tax payers are very low in India right now, only 15 million people filing income tax returns. So he's talked about increasing the compliance as well. Let's go across to Ketan Dalal. He joins us from Katalyst Advisors. Mr. Dalal, thank you so much for taking time out to chat with us this morning. What is your sense on the announcements made by the Prime Minister so far about bringing in more transparency, making the taxpayer's life easier with the faceless appeal, taxpayer charter, faceless assessment? What is your take on this?
Yeah, so I think there are 2 or 3 separate issues. So I think... Hello? 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 Hello, can you hear me?
Mr. Dalal?
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so there are 2 separate aspects. One is on the taxpayers charter. So in the Finance Act 20, Section 119A was introduced, which, requires the CBDG to issue and declare a charter. I think an informal version of that was already there for many years. And I think it's a good move to put it in the law. But I think the key point is that it should be, first of all, let us see the content of it. Let us also bear in mind that the heart of the matter is implementation and on-ground, following it in spirit. Because the day-to-day problems, getting refunds, not getting credit, orders giving effect, delays in issuing of withholding are very, very serious today. But having said which, I think this is a good thing. So that's one aspect. The second one is on the faceless. I think it's an extremely bold and revolutionary move. And I know from talking to senior officials in the tax department, that the enormous amount of effort has gone into creating that architecture. And it's a very good architecture. The only big concern that I have, there are 2, 3 concerns actually. One is that the documents to be loaded, sometimes they are so complex. So imagine a situation of, let's say a huge company like, say, an Infosys or a Wipro or a Bank of India, for example, trying to load all these documents and the complexity of loading those documents and a person in Guwahati trying to understand this assessment without any interaction, that could become a major challenge. That's number one. Number two, however, on a positive side, the lack of face-to-face interaction is likely to definitely lead to lack of rent seeking, and hopefully, therefore, less harassment of the taxpayers. Again, as I said, for large assessments, I'm not sure how it is going to work. And remember that these large assessments, I think 50 or 60 or 100 companies account for 45% of India's tax collection. So we have to also be cautious that when we are talking of, numbers, are we talking of numbers as in the number of taxpayers, or are we talking of value? So in terms of value, it could be different. Having said which, as I said, it's a very bold move. And I think over a period of time, if implemented well, it should make a significant difference to India's tax administration.
Right. Mr. Dalal, hi, good morning. This is Ruchi Bhatia. The Prime Minister today saying that the taxation regime is going to be seamless, it is going to be painless and also faceless. Also announcing faceless assessment, faceless, appeals as well as a tax charter. I want to understand from you, you did talk about that while yes, the documentation simplification is going to be paramount. It needs to be seen how the tax department is going to adopt this whole new approach. I want to understand from you, you did talk about how in terms of big cases, this whole process could be challenging. Talk to us a little more about it as to what is it that the tax department needs to change in its approach for the big cases, for the cases which amount to large money in terms of appeals?
Yeah, so I think, you see, what happens, Ruchi, is in large cases, there are two aspects. One is the facts are usually quite complex. So I think the tax department first needs to understand the business. So, for example, an IT business, information technology business is very different from a retail business. That's very different from a petrochemical business. And of course, that's very different from a asset management company. So I think the biggest issue today is that the complexity of sectors is something which is very difficult to understand. And if a tax officer, especially in a large case, is not even sitting face to face, he has to spend the time and the energy to understand the nature of the business, understand its peculiarities, and then approach the assessment. So that's one part. The second, Ruchi, is a much softer point, and that softer point in my 40 has become very critical, and that is the need to look at large corporates not with suspicion, because these corporates, over a period of last 10, 15 years, the large corporates are subject to a lot of shareholder scrutiny, analyst scrutiny, press scrutiny, FII scrutiny. So there is an automatic checks and balance built in there. And if the tax department can, sort of look at it from that light, so A, understanding the sector, and B, look at it with less suspicion, I think the combination of these two, I think, will be very helpful in the context of this path-breaking initiative. These are the two things that I would say. And additionally, the last point is that the need to have the appetite to go into a lot of factual detail if required, as I said, without needless suspicion, just to understand. And that these three, I think, will help probably to do a fairer assessment.
Right. Mr. Dalal, I also want to pick your brains on what the Prime Minister said, that in a country of 130 crore people, we just have a little over 1.5 crore people who are paying taxes. Also goes on to show that in the years to come, this is going to be something that the government is going to focus on as to how to increase and widen your tax base.
Yes, that is true. I do agree with that. But I think there are two or three aspects, which is that we must remember here. You see, the reality is that we do not have, an egalitarian society. So, for example, in US, if you see the median income of a family is, let's say, $70,000. What will happen is that about 75 to 80% of the US population of 250 million will fall within 10 to 15% of that $70,000 bracket. In India, you don't have like a bell curve. You have like a balloon. You have the unfortunate reality is that, you will have the top 1%, having say 60% of the income, the next 4% having 20% of the income, and then the rest. So So we must look at this country from that point of view. And I think the larger issue is to bring them up the curve, because unless they come up the curve, they will not have the income, and therefore they obviously can't pay the tax. Having said which, there is a leakage to some extent in relatively unorganized sectors, but with demonetization and GST, the unorganized sector's ability to earn income is anyway, and which is unfortunate by the way, has been substantially curtailed. And with COVID, of course, the impact will be enormous. So I think the larger issue is to bring them up the curve rather than, making it sound as if there is a huge amount of non-compliance. There may be, but it may be in terms of numbers, but I suspect in value, it may not be a huge leakage.
Okay. Okay, all right. On that note, Mr. Dalal, always a pleasure chatting with you and getting in your perspective.